Alright everyone, hello, welcome to my tabs faction tier list. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe and comment if you have something interesting to say or you think this could be changed in any way to make it better. Alright, see you on the other side. Alright, hello everyone, so let's get cracking with this tabs tier list. So, I think we're going to start first with our tribal faction. Are they good? Are they bad? Well, they're really bad. Basically, they suffer from the problem in that all of their units are just outclassed. The clubber, why would you ever pick that over a farmer? Or if you're using them for fodder, why would you not just pick a peasant? The protector is way worse than the shield bearer from the ancient faction, but just a little bit cheaper. So I don't think it's a decent trade-off. I don't even know who to compare the chieftain to. $400 for that bad of a unit? It's awful. It's so bad. You can usually be taken out by two squires, maybe three. It's just definitely not worth the money. The Bone Mage is actually pretty decent, but their boss unit, the Mammoth, is getting outclassed now, and I definitely think it needs a buff. That's why I'm putting it in D. Alright, moving on to the Farmer faction. I also think, no, I would say Farmer faction is a B. Just because, because of the farmers are really decent units. If you're using them against other like low tier melee units like clubbers or squires, they're gonna do really decent. Or against like shield bearers or protectors, maybe even against like fencers and halberds, they do decent. So that's why I put them there. And then we also have the Scarecrow, which is a really decent unit. The potion throwers can be okay, but often inflict a lot of self damage on their own team, which is not ideal. The wheelbarrow is just trash. Sorry, it's really bad. And halfling it was a decent fodder unit, but it gets outclassed by the peasant now, so I don't really think it's ever useful putting a halfling in your army. Alright, moving on to the medieval faction. Yeah, these guys are also in D. I'd say they're slightly better than the tribal faction, but only barely. The king is definitely getting outclassed by the Jarl now. They're both the same, but the Jarl has the Ice Arena ability and the Enrage ability, which makes him invincible. So that's definitely a pick for me. And then the medieval faction, the catapult's okay, but the spooky catapult's way better, just with the bounces and stuff. And they cost the same too. The archers are decent, but I don't really find myself using them that much. Squires are definitely not worth the money. Rather go something like farmers for low class melee units. And the bard is awful. The bards have never really done that well. Okay, moving on to the ancient faction. I definitely put them in A because their ballista is super good, especially when buffed by cheerleaders. And Zeus is also really, really good for crowd control. If you can get a good lightning off, it is absolutely insane. The shield bearers are also really good against range units, like even Artemis. They'll last for a long time. So yeah, they're definitely worth a pick. Hoplites and Sarissas, decent. Sarissas are decent anti-cav, but Pikes are kind of taking that role now. Okay, so now we're going with the Viking faction, which is the last of the old factions. I think the Viking faction is actually also A tier because the Jarl got super mega buffed in last update, 2 updates ago. Whenever the unit creator came out, it got super buffed, and now it is really good. The longship has stayed a really good crowd control unit, and the paddles just do so much damage, like even against like hero units, like the king. So that's really good. Berserkers are really good. I keep saying really good. They're pretty decent, but they're being outclassed now, actually, which I never thought would happen by the Shadow Walkers, who literally just teleport behind the whole army and attack the ranged units. So, um, you know, the Shadow Walkers obviously are never going to be able to go hand to hand, but if you can get them into the squishy backline, they're going to do really good. Whereas the Berserkers are going to be more tanky, and they're going to have to fight off more melee units than the Shadow Walkers would. Okay, moving on to the Dynasty faction. I would say these are a B. The Huacha is the only thing that saves this really. The Huacha is super, super, super good. Maybe even overpowered. Like, I don't know what video it was, but I just spammed Huachas and I was able to take down the Super Peasant. So, that's really incredible. And then their boss unit, the Monkey King, he is not that good. The cloning feature is it's a great idea, but I don't think it really works in practice. If you're gonna use something for distraction, I would just use a peasants, really. I mean, they cost 30 gold, whereas the Monkey King costs 2,000, which isn't too bad. But just for distraction, I don't think he's that good. Samurai are also decent. They're decent anti-range, but they kind of fall off a bit if the unit has more than a 1-to-1 ratio, or if they have something like firework arrows or bomb throwers or whatever, and they're not that good at melee. I think they lose against squires and farmers, which is really unfortunate for them. So that's why I would put them in B and not A tier. Okay, moving on to the Renaissance faction. I actually really like this faction, but I definitely think they're C tier, almost D tier. The only thing that saves them is the muskets. That's their only good unit. The adventure take can be taken out for less than $1,000. Um, the balloon archers are decent anti-hero. Actually, they're another good unit. The painters are outclassed by peasants yet again. It seems a lot of our low tier units that we use for fodder being outclassed by the peasant from the legacy faction, which is really unfortunate, but sometimes that's the way things go. And, the fencer and the halberd, they're okay, but I don't really think of Renaissance as a melee focused army, so I tend not to use them as much. Okay, the pirate faction. Ooh, these guys I'd say are definitely A tier. Not, no, I'd put them in a low S tier, just because all of their units are definitely usable, even harpooners. Um, but only a few stand out, like the blunderbuss. Ooh, that is an insanely good unit. The cannons are also really good. I love the cannons. I definitely think that for only 100 more than the ballista, they're definitely worth it. Just because they're going to be able to take out a lot of the lower tier units quicker because of the faster attack range. If you're using it against hero units, like the king or even the ice giant, it's not going to do as well as a ballista. But it still does decent. Of course, we have the pirate queen, who is really good, crowd control, and just tankiness in general. The captain is also the same, just cheaper and not as good. Um, and the flintlocks are okay. I don't really use them that much. And then of course the bomb throwers are absolutely incredible. Okay, the Wild West faction. These guys are really. Oh wait, no. Spooky faction. Sorry, Spooky faction is pretty decent. I like the fear mechanic with the fodder units, but I don't understand why they have a shield. It never works. They have like no health. I don't really find myself using them that much, but I feel like I have to place the Spooky faction in the B tier just because of the Reaper and the Sword guy. The vampires can be used sometimes, but they're not going to be used that often. So I say middling B tier is a good spot for the Spooky faction right now. Of course, we have the Catapult, which is also really good and way better than the medieval one, in my opinion. Okay, the Wild West faction. I'm gonna have to put these in A tier because, of course, the Deadeye can just take out a lot of hero units and like middling melee units. So like they're gonna be really good against halberds and stuff like that. And then of course we have the guy with the 6-shot repeater, the hero unit. The quick draw. He is so good. He's fires 6 shots. He has this dodge that takes him like a mile away from melee units, and he can almost recharge it by the time they get back to him again, unless he whiffs and like runs into a building or something. So he's super good. Cactus is also really good anti-ranged, and that's really about it. The dynamite thrower, the miner are not good. The lasso thrower is laughably bad, so that's kind of rough for them. All right, the legacy faction. Wow, these guys were the first faction that was actually like bigger than the normal ones. That wasn't the secret faction. I'd say these guys have to be A tier because the tank is incredible. The barrel rollers are awesome. I really like the versatility of the banner bearers. The banner bearer and the flag bearer are both really neat units that I like. Pike is awesome anti-cav, or just anti-hero unit in general. And, Thor is pretty decent. Of course, Super Peasant and Dark Peasant you're never going to use in a real campaign, but they're fun to have in there anyways. Alright, the good faction. These guys are definitely S tier. They're so good. Their boss unit, the Chronomancer, when he transforms, he just turns into like the most OP unit ever. He starts flying, so it's really hard to attack him from the ground. Of course, he does massive damage to both big and small units, so he's really good. We have the Divine Arbiter, which is an insane ranged unit for only 1,000. it can cause so much damage. And especially if it's player controlled, you can just sit it on a rock far away and just fire those bolts out like nobody's business. We have what the Solar Aegis, who is incredibly good, really good anti-range, and it does a lot of damage against melee units. I'd say their worst has to be the Righteous, whatever, the Paladin guy. He's decently tanky, but he doesn't do any damage. Even crowd control damage with this hammer thing is negligible at best. And then whatever the Gauntlet guys, those are also awful. The the evil faction, I'm gonna have to place in the C tier. I know, really, no, I'll place it in the B tier just because of the Deathbringer is really good, and you also have the Shadow Walkers, which are really good at taking down the back line. But the Tempest Lich is so bad. It if the unit is coming towards the Lich, whatever, however you say it, then it's not going to do any damage with its little cloud. You have to have stalling units, and then you have to have this unit to be effective, which is a lot of money, just for some crowd control, which I don't think is worth it. The mad mechanics are awful. For $500, they do nothing really. Their attack is so short range, and they have no health, and they do no damage. I just think those have to be the worst units ever. And then we have the Exiled guy, which is fun in practice, but he's not really that good. Doesn't have a lot of health, and he can't really do that much damage. And then we have the whatever the Druid Sorcerer guy, who is decent. He can be decent, but I don't really know how to use him. So I think really the only reason you'd bring this faction is for the Shadow Walkers and the Deathbringer. The Void Monarch's okay, but if you're going against a good faction, he definitely gets outclassed by like the Chronomancer and can easily be taken out by long-range units, which is kind of unfortunate. Lastly, the Secret faction, which is like S plus 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 plus. It is so good, just because of the cheerleaders. I mean, the cheerleaders make this faction. If you pair them with any other faction in this, any other ranged unit in this faction, they're gonna dominate. You have Artemis, the Ice Giant, cheerleaders, explosive cannon, cavalry, all these different units that are super good. Obviously, this isn't really comparable to the other factions just because there's so many units, but for what it's worth, they're definitely the best faction in the game. Alright, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with me, and make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you later. Adios.